And well, good evening to all of you again, here from Sophia World Minds Meet Online. Today, we're going to dedicate the meeting uh, to one of the most unique authors of the second half of the 20th century, one who in the United States continued a kind of a tradition in literature that was a combination of late 19th century Romantic English literature, the Jewish storytelling kind of literature that we could find at writers like Malamud, like Bashevis Singer. But what makes Saul Bellow so unique is his incredible wisdom. His erudition was second to none. Everything that he could get his hands on was of incredible interest to him. And he could really dive into a culture and find those ways of identifying that culture in such and describing it in such a precise way that after that it seemed impossible to better anything that he did. He was born in Canada in 1915, moved to Chicago as a child. His real name was not Bellow. Bellow in English means the sound that animal makes. When we hear the sound of a herd of, for example, of cows, the cows bellow. And he chose the name because he felt that the sound, the bellow, is what literature needed, not the sleek and kind of beautiful voices, but the bellow. So Bellow became actually I would say the pioneer of a new type of literature that we found the beginning of with writers like Russian writers like the late Tolstoy, like Dostoevsky, mainly Dostoevsky, the literature of the victim. The victim as a hero. But the interesting thing about the literature of Saul Bellow is that he knew how to render the literature of the victim a literature of getting away from being a victim. Some of his first novels, Seize the Day, was a novel written at the end of World War II, 1948, and it's about a young man from Canada that moves over to the United States to be able to join the army and go to fight in Europe. And as he's not an American citizen, he is not called to join the army. But they promise him, don't worry, just stay here and we'll call you. The whole book is about the way that he loses the big drive that made him want to join the army, wanted to take part in something that he found had to be changed. From sees the day, Saul Bellow matured incredibly, and in 1964 he wrote what is going to be the theme of many of our meetings, because it's, first of all, it's a wonderful book, and second of all, it's a book that lays the ground to the story of every man in the modern societies, a story of every man in the modern, I would say, Western society. The man that felt that he had to study in order to achieve something in life, and once he had studied and once he had achieved in academia what he wanted, he all of a sudden he found out that it gave him nothing. So if we were used in the beginning of the 20th century to the Bildungsromane, the growing up novels, like authors like, well, to a certain degree, even Joyce, but mainly Thomas Mann. The novel Herzog is exactly the contrary. It's the educated man finding out how much the education gives him nothing, and how much the education is only there to serve him as a kind of a telescope to emphasize how empty his life is, and maybe to allow him to see the emptiness and the senselessness of that life, because he's learned and because he knows how to define learning. This is a book that starts by a line that goes and follows me almost every day of my life. I remember that line, and we will start by saying, I'll read to you two short paragraphs. One is going to be the first opening paragraph of the book. Now, with your permission, I'll light here another little light, so I have some more light. Okay. The book opens, if I'm out of my mind, it's all right with me, thought Moses Herzog. Some people thought he was cracked, and for a time, he himself had doubted that he was all there. But now, though he still behaved oddly, he felt confident, cheerful, clairvoyant, and strong. He had fallen under a spell and was writing letters to everyone under the sun. He was so steered by these letters that from the end of June he moved from place to place with a valise full of papers. He had carried this valise from New York to Martha's vineyard, but returned from the vineyard immediately. 2 days later, he flew to Chicago, and from Chicago he went to a village in western Massachusetts. Hidden in the country, he wrote endlessly, fanatically, to the newspapers, to the people in public life, to friends and relatives, and at last to the dead, his own obscure dead, and finally to the famous dad. And let me move to the very last page and see how this book ends. And believe me, I'm not trying to spoil the joy of the book, because the book is not linear. It's not a drama that starts, develops, and there are confrontations. No, it goes backwards. And from the beginning of the book, where he has so much to say, and we'll find out what he has to say, and why it's so important that he doesn't say it to anybody alive. He says it to himself, and he says it in letters that he does not send to anybody. And the book ends walking over notes and papers. He lay down on his Recamier couch as he stretched out. He took a long breath, and then he lay looking at the mesh of the screen, pulled loose by vines, and listening to the steady scratching of Mrs. Turtle's broom. He wanted to tell her to sprinkle the floor. She was raising too much dust. In a few moments, he would call out to her, and damp it down, Mr. Turtle. There's water in the sink. But not just yet. At this time, he had no message for anyone. Nothing. Not a single word. This is the ending of the book of a man, Moses Elkanah Herzog, achieved fame when young, when as a very young man he wrote his thesis for a PhD in Romanticism in Europe of the 19th century, and became a kind of a fallen guru because he never succeeded in living up to his fame of that one book that made him famous. And although the book became more and more wanted in universities around Europe and the United States, he felt that he became further and further away of that book. And as his growth as a human being was so fast that he achieved what he set out to achieve at quite an early age. At the age of 24, he already had his PhD and was already with a dignified and honorable and quite well-paying and rewarding academic role. But then he marries, has a daughter, and divorces. He has a son and divorces his first wife. And then he falls into a renewal of his life through marrying Madeleine, whom he says here that he saved her from the church. Madeleine was in a terrible state of mind. Her father was a theater impresario. Some people, it says here, even called him the the American reinventor of the theater, and she hated her father passionately, and because she hated him so much, she wanted to get as far away from him as possible, and she chose the church. She chose to leave Judaism and follow a priest. And just before she was about to become Christian, she meets Herzog, and Herzog finds it in himself to be very charming and charismatic and attractive. And he attracts this neurotic beauty away from the church. And before he knows it, before he understands what's happening, he finds himself in a situation where it's either or. Either he commits 100% to substitute whatever she was looking for in the church in his own being, in his own persona, or he's going to lose this fantastic woman. Although he had no idea what he was going to gain, he knew that he did not want to lose. So Moses Herzog actually sacrifices everything he had in order to have this fantastic, beautiful, if neurotic woman. It's exactly at that time that he receives a small bequeath, a small heritage from his father, who was a bootlegger, by the way. A bootlegger are those people that used to make whiskey in the Prohibition time, and between 1927 and 1931, when Prohibition was in the United States. You had no right neither to buy nor to produce or sell hard drinks, and especially with whiskey. Herzog's father was a bootlegger, and that's why he moved from Canada over the Great Lake to Chicago. And Moses Elkanah, Herzog's father, was also a bootlegger. Only both of them, Herzog's father and Saul Bellow's father, were not very, very successful. And the big heritage that the father left Moses Herzog was $25,000, which were quite a serious sum in the late 40s, early 50s. It was enough for him to buy a big house in the middle of the Berkshires, which is in the north, in Massachusetts, just about above the New York State. A very beautiful, one of the very few places in the world where you can still see 4 seasons. There's still summer is followed by autumn, and winter is followed by spring. There are 4 seasons, and the colors are incredibly beautiful, and they change from the yellow to the dark brown to red and to green, and it's very beautiful, but very lonely. Only Moses Herzog gives up everything he has. He gives up a job, quite nicely paying job in a university, and very, very respectable. And he gives up the small bequest that he had from his father. There's nothing to give up in the respect that his brothers did not have to him. One of his brothers is a millionaire in real estate, and the other one is quite a wealthy man who lives down in Pennsylvania, and they both find him, as they say here, quite hopeless. There's no hope to somebody who actually dedicates and invests everything he has into mere following of ideas, of writing. One thing we have to understand, and it comes here very, very early when he talks about himself, to himself. Part of it he writes down, part of it he just thinks. He calls himself the suffering joker. You'll find it on page 17 of the book. He jokes about everything. He always tries to find a way to go around the essentials of seriousness, of a serious situation, by finding the nice and funny side of it. And just listen to the way that Herzog says it, of course, written by Saul Bellow. He was a person of irregular tendencies. He practiced the art of circling among random facts to swoop down on the essentials. It's just, we have a sense of this as if it's a huge eagle that raises up to the sky so that it can see clearer and then plunge down and get the rabbit or whatever. But no, he raises up, but then he swoops down. In other words, he just collapses on top of the essentials. He often expected to take the essentials by surprise. He's that kind of a person. Actually, so well known to anybody who's been to academia. He's those people that say a lot of things, trying to find the moment that their listeners are almost asleep, or at least their minds is almost asleep. And then, when everybody is very, very tired, they come out with an arrow that goes directly into the heart of something that they only understand the importance of. And Saul Bellow depicts in a very gentle way the non-importance of the life of the academic, and not only the non-importance, but the complete debacle, complete defeat of somebody who says, I want to be an academic because I have something important to say to the world. And here is, he succeeds in saying something important to the world, and it means nothing. The world is not changed. He's not changed. And what he's trying to do through the whole book is try to find the way back to himself, back away from the society to which he felt he gave everything he had to give, and he felt that society was actually always very nice to him, and he calls himself all the time that he's lucky. He's quite good looking. When he's about to get divorced from a second wife, with whom he has a daughter, and by the way, when he's about to get divorced from his second wife, his son from the first marriage tells him that he's a complete loss because he abandons the young daughter that he has with his second wife. And that's why the son from his first wedding, who is now 13, and to whom Herzog has only love, but no understanding. He wants to offer him everything that he feels he can, but he has no idea what the boy really needs. And we can start seeing how this everyman. Are you familiar with the work everyman of the early uh, English Renaissance? Everyman is this person, the average human being who appears in it's a play, who appears in a play wherever there is a catastrophe. If there's a plague, every man appears. And why is he there? Because he's trying to get away of death. And if death had his triumph already through the plague, he's sure that death is not going to get him. So every man is wherever there is a catastrophe, because the catastrophe is already over, so every man is there. And Herzog is that kind of everyman, but he is the one who creates and undergoes the catastrophe. He is there, first of all, to suffer in order to then look back and find the funny things about the suffering. What happens here? The book starts actually at the end and builds up back to that end with a series of humorous, witty, but above all, very humanly charged with wisdom build up. We see that at the beginning of the book, his second wife, Magdalena, and the names are very, very important here. Magdalena, as we all know, the woman who Christ blessed, Maria Magdalena, the prostitute who became holier than holy, and his second wife's name is Madeleine, which is the French-American way to call Magdalena. And he grabs her away from the church, and she says, I don't want to live in New York. He teaches in New York and has a very nice job. But he gives it up and buys that house in the middle of the Berkshires with $25,000. And why does he do it there? Because he has a friend, Gersbach. Gersbach is a radio announcer, a DJ, more or less. And tall, beautiful voice, red hair, and has a wooden leg. And immediately we find out that the cause for the divorce was that Madeleine had a love story with Gersbach, and not only did this love story start eating away at whatever there was there between Magdalena and Moses Herzog, but when Herzog was proposed a job in Chicago to teach, Madeleine said, we cannot leave the Gersbachs here. We have to help them, and you have to find a job for him in a radio, and they have to come with us. So the cuckold Moses Herzog does exactly what his wife asks him to do, and he finds a job for Gersbach in Chicago, so that the love story between Gersbach and Moses Herzog's wife can bloom and come to the point where she doesn't ask him for a divorce. She comes and tells him that she has already spoken to a lawyer, and he asks her, who is the lawyer? And she gives him the name, Blumenstein, and said, but he's my friend, he's my lawyer. Yeah, she says, well, that's why I went to him, so that you feel comfortable that whatever he says is right. And he says, what did he say? And she tells him, well, he said that everything is mine and that you can keep the house in the Berkshires, but uh, all the furniture are all mine. All the money that you have is all mine. And actually, he offered that you can come and stay at his house. So right at the beginning, Moses Herzog finds himself that he gave up something that he believed in as a youth. He gave up his academic career in order to start up a new life with this incredible, beautiful woman. He actually never says that she's beautiful. She's incredibly attractive. She's sexually very provocative in his eyes. And things are bad in his head because immediately afterwards he finds a job to teach a night course in a night school in New York, and he teaches the importance of the romantic writers of England and the way that they described nature in the 18th and 19th century. His students very fast understood that they're not going to learn anything about the romantics, but they're going to be able to be spectators at an incredible spectacle of somebody who was slowly but surely losing the grab on reality. He would say, in one point, Herzog, there's someone inside me. I'm in his grip. When I speak of him, I feel him in my head, pounding for order. He will ruin me. It has been reported, he wrote, that several teams of Russian cosmonauts have been lost, disintegrated, we must assume. One was heard calling SOS, World SOS. Soviet confirmation has been withheld. And now it's the first time on page 17 that we start feeling that Moses Herzog comes loose at the seams. It's like a very beautiful jacket with beautiful seams that come apart. And it's the first time, out of the blue, he writes a letter to his dead mother. In his head, he's not writing it down yet. Dear Mama, as to why I haven't visited your grave in so long, and then he goes to somebody else. Dear Wanda, and then to somebody else. Dear Zinka, dear Libby, dear Ramona, dear Somno, I need help in the worst way. I'm afraid of falling apart. Dear Edvig, the fact is that madness also has been denied me. There's a fantastic passage here where he feels that if he can be defined as a mad person, he will lose the responsibility to whatever he does. He'll be taken to some romantically nice home for the mad, and finally everybody will feel pity for him, and his brother will come and pay for his stay. But he cannot be defined as mad. So what does he do? Dear Mr. President, Internal Revenue regulations will turn us into a nation of bookkeepers. The life of every citizen is becoming a business. This, it seems, is one of the worst interpretations of the meaning of human life history has ever seen. Man's life is not a business. And how shall I sign this? Moses thought. All these letters are still things that run in his head, and he would write down just droppings. We find him in the beginning of the book where he shares his food with mice. And let me just read the first couple of pages of the book and listen to the way that Saul Bellow sits in the corner and he winds up like you wind up the mechanical toys of once and let them start running. He winds up this very, very clever but almost mad human being and washes him and allows him to do things, but then he sends him a message, and we'll find out what the message is a little bit further on. So let's go through the first pages of the book. I'll repeat the first paragraph that I read before. If I'm out of my mind, it's all right with me, thought Moses Herzog. Some people thought he was cracked, and for a time he himself had doubted that he was all there. But now, though he still behaved oddly, he felt confident, cheerful, clairvoyant, and strong. He had fallen under a spell and was writing letters to everyone under the sun. He was so stirred by these letters that from the end of June he moved from place to place with a valise full of papers. He had carried this valise from New York to Martha's Vineyard, but returned from the vineyard immediately. 2 days later he flew to Chicago, and from Chicago he went to a village in western Massachusetts. Hidden in the country, he wrote endlessly, fanatically, to the newspapers, to people in public life, to friends and relatives, and at last to the dead, his own obscure dead, and finally to the famous dead. It was the peak of summer in the Berkshires. Berkshires is a region in the northern part of the Massachusetts, in the northeast of the United States. Herzog was alone in the big old house. Normally particular about food, now listen to this, he now ate silver cup bread. Now, silver cup bread, there's a saying in American, not so much in English, it's like inventing sliced bread, because the Americans invented sliced bread. You buy bread in America, it tastes like paper, and it looks like paper, but it's sliced, so you don't have to work and slice the beautiful breads that you have in Europe. And the most famous sliced bread is the silver cup bread. And the bon vivant, the gourmand, will never eat silver cup bread. So he now ate silver cup bread from the paper package, beans from the can, and American cheese. Now and then he picked raspberries in the overgrown garden, lifting up the thorny canes with absent-minded caution. As for sleep, he slept on a mattress without sheets. It was his abandoned marriage bed, or in the hammock, covered by his coat. Tall, bearded grass and locust and maple seedlings surrounding him in the yard. When he opened his eyes in the night, the stars were near like spirituals' bodies. Fires, of course, gases, minerals, heat, atoms, but eloquent at 5 in the morning to a man lying in a hammock wrapped in his overcoat. When some new thought gripped his heart, he ran to the kitchen, his headquarters, to write it down. The white paint was scaling from the brick walls, and Herzog sometimes wiped mouse dropping from the table with a sleeve. Mice dropping is what the mice would leave as their excretion. And he doesn't care, he just mops it away from the table, calmly wondering why field mice should have such a passion for wax and paraffin. They would make holes in paraffin-sealed preserves. They ignored birthday candles. You know birthday candles where there's a little bit of wax and a wick, and they would ignore the candle down to the wick. A rat chewed into a package of bread, leaving the shape of its body in the layers of slices. Herzog ate the other half of the loaf, spread with jam. He could share with rats too. All the while, one corner of his mind remained open to the external world. He heard the crows in the morning. Their harsh calls was delicious. He heard the thrushes at dusk. At night there was a barn owl. When he walked in the garden excited by a mental letter, he saw roses winding up about the rain spout, or mulberries, birds gorging in the mulberry tree. The days were hot, the evenings flushed and dusty. He looked keenly at everything, but he felt half blind. His friend, well, his former friend, Valentine, and this is Garsbach, and his wife, his ex-wife, Madeleine, had spread the rumor that his sanity had collapsed. Was it true? He was taking around the empty house and saw the shadow of his face in a gray, webby window. He looked weirdly tranquil. A radiant line went from mid-forehead over his straight nose and full yet silent lips. Late in spring, Herzog had been overcome by the need to explain, to have it out, to justify, to put it in perspective, to clarify, to make amends. Now, what does this remind us of? Who has the drive to explain, to make amends, to have a message to the world? The academic. When he goes out, he feels that he has something to say in his thesis, something that is a message to humankind. After that, Moses Herzog had his say as an academic and his PhD thesis was very well received. He finds out that he said nothing. And now he tries to say everything in obscure letters. He tries to find his way back to the society that actually he left in order to get some kind of a new life, some kind of a new excitement with a neurotic woman. And now that everything was against him, now that he was completely alone, he is trying to come back with new things that he finds he has to say. And those new things are the letters. At that time, he has been giving adult education lectures in a New York night school. He was clear enough in April, but by the end of May, he began to ramble. It became apparent to his students that they would never learn much about the roots of Romanticism, but that they would see and hear odd things. One after another, the academic formalities dropped away. Professor Herzog had the unconscious frankness of a man deeply preoccupied, and towards the end of the term there were long pauses in his lectures. He would stop, muttering, excuse me, reaching inside his coat for his pen, the table creaking. He wrote on scraps of paper with a great pressure of eagerness in his hand. He was absorbed, his eyes darkly circled, his white face showed everything, everything. He was reasoning, arguing, he was suffering. He had thought of a brilliant alternative. He was wide open. He was narrow. His eyes, his mouth made everything silently clear. Longing, bigotry, bitter anger. One could see it all. The class waited 3 minutes, 5 minutes, utterly silent. At first, there was no pattern to the notes he made. They were fragments, nonsense, syllables, exclamations, twisted proverbs, and quotation, or in the Yiddish of his long-dead mother, Trepwörter, reports that came too late. Then you were already on your way down the stairs. He wrote, for instance, death, die, live again, die again, live. No person, no death, which reminds us very much of Albert Camus. No person, no absurd. Sisyphus is happy because he finds happiness in something that he cannot change. Similar to what we read here. And on the knees of your soul, might as well be useful. Scrub the floor. Next, answer a fool according to his folly, lest he be wise in his own conceit. Next, answer not a fool according to his folly, lest thou be like unto him. Choose one, he would think. He noted also, I see by Walter Winchell that Johann Sebastian Bach put on black gloves to compose a requiem mass. Herzog scarcely knew what to think of his scrolling. He yielded to the excitement that inspired it and suspected at times that it might be a symptom of disintegration. That did not frighten him. Lying on the sofa of the kitchenette apartment he had rented on 17th Street, he is now in New York, he sometimes imagined he was an industry and manufactured personal history, and so himself from birth to death. He conceded on a piece of paper, I cannot justify. Considering his entire life, he realized that he had mismanaged everything, everything. His life was, as the phrase goes, ruined. But since it had not been much to begin with, there was not much to grieve about. Thinking on the malodorous sofa, malodorous means smelling very badly, of the centuries, the 19th, the 16th, the 18th, he turned up from the last a saying that he liked. And that's a beautiful, incredibly beautiful line that I'd like to underline. Grief, sir, is a species of idleness. He went on taking stock, lying face down on the sofa. Was he a clever man, or was he an idiot? Well, he could not at this time claim to be clever. He might once have had the making of a clever character, but he had chosen to be dreamy instead, and the Sharpies cleaned him out. What's more, he was losing his hair. He read the ads of the Thomas Culp specialist, with the exaggerated skepticism of a man whose craving to believe was deep and desperate. Scalp expert. So he was a formerly handsome man. His face revealed what a beating he had taken. Asked to be beaten, and his attacker's strength that brought him to consider his character. What sort of character was it? Well, in the modern vocabulary, it was narcissistic, it was masochistic, it was anachronistic. He liked that. His clinical picture was depressive, not the severest type, not a manic depressive. He must have admitted that there were worse cripples around. If you believed, as everyone nowadays but apparently did, that man was a sick animal, then was he even spectacularly sick? Exceptionally blind? Extraordinarily degraded? No! Was he intelligent? Well, his intellect would have been more effective if he had had an aggressive, paranoid character, eager for power. He was jealous, but not exceptionally competitive, not a true paranoiac. And what about his learning, his academia? He was obliged to admit now that he was not much of a professor. Well, he was earnest. He had a certain large, immature sincerity, but he might never succeed in becoming systematic. He had made a brilliant start in his PhD thesis, The State of Nature in 17th and 18th Century English and French Political Philosophy. Very important. He had to his credit also several articles and a book, Romanticism and Christianity. But the rest of his ambitious projects had dried up, one after the other. On the strength of his early successes, he had never had difficulty in finding jobs and obtaining research grants. The Narragansett Corporation had paid him $15,000 over a number of years to continue his studies in Romanticism. The results laid in the closet in an old valise, 800 pages of chaotic argument, which had never found its focus. It was painful to think of it. On the floor beside him were pieces of paper, and he occasionally leaned down to write. He now sat down. Not that long disease, my life, but that long convalescence, my life. The liberal bourgeois revision, the illusion of improvement, the poison of hope. He thought a while of Mithridates, whose system learned to thrive on poison. He treated his assassins who made the mistake of using small doses, and he was pickled, not destroyed. Tutto fa brodo, he thought. Resuming his self-examination, he admitted that he had been a bad husband twice. Daisy, his first wife, he had treated miserably. Madeleine, his second, had tried to do him in other words, to kill him. To his son and his daughter, he was a loving but bad father. To his own parents, he had been an ungrateful child. To his country, an indifferent citizen. To his brothers and his sister, affectionate but remote. With his friends, an egotist. With love, lazy. With brightness, dull. With power, passive. With his own soul, evasive. Satisfied with his own severity and criticism, he positively enjoyed the hardness and factual rigor of his judgment. He laid on his sofa, his arms rising behind him, his legs extended without him. But how charming we remain, notwithstanding. Papa, he thought, poor man, could charm birds from the trees, crocodiles from mud. Madeleine, too, had great charm and beauty of person also, and a brilliant mind. Valentine Gersbach, her lover, was a charming man too, though in a heavier, brutal way. He had a thick chin, flaming copper hair that literally gushed from his head. No Thomas Culp specialist for him, and he walked on a wooden leg, gracefully bending and straightening like a gondolier. Herzog himself had no small amount of charm, but his sexual powers had been damaged by Madeleine, and without the ability to attract women, how was he to recover? It was in this respect that he felt most like a convalescent. These are the first 5 pages of this book. I would like to stop here and allow us to let these few pages sink in, so that for Saturday in 2 weeks, because next week we're going to have another visit of Albert Camus and L'étranger, I would like in 2 weeks to start examining how this man, who achieved everything he wanted to achieve, found out that it was meaningless, and how he, in a courageous way, wanted to change everything and to find himself again in a different way, and what happened to the change that he was implementing, to the change that he was letting himself come under, and how he comes apart only to rebuild not his hope, but his ability to live within the absurd of modern life of the intellectuals. Is there anything that one of you would like to ask, to say? There's a lot of words in English, which is not the first language of neither of you, so it might have been a little bit difficult. And as I love this text, I might be getting carried away reading it. But, well, how do you feel about it? Shall we go on with this book and take it to the end? What do you say, Cornelia? Yeah, go ahead. I'll unmute both of you and we'll see what happens. Go ahead.
Yes. It's the first time I'm having such a little contact with this book, and I really want to go on.
Okay, so do I. I love
it.
it.
Made me think a little about Camus, what we talked the previous
Exactly.
week.
Yes.
It's a sort of. I think it will go nice together.
It's a book where sometimes we'll find ourselves laughing, and sometimes I find myself really in tears. In tears, not because it's sad. In tears because it's so true. It's so, and I must say, and I think anybody who lived a pretentious life of an intellectual in the 20th and the beginning of the 21st century, I find myself in very many of the moments of Herzog. We will see later Herzog as a young man who was, although taken by academia and by studying and by writing, always trying to find a new shirt, always trying to find a new pair of trousers, always trying to find different boots. And at one point he says the different boots that he found were now the crazy cri of the homosexuals down in the village in New York, and he wanted to be a macho with those boots. Uh, there's a lot of love that streams from Saul Bellow to his alter ego Moses Elkanah Herzog, and I just would like to finish this evening by pointing something about the name. Herzog means in German account. Herz is heart, breast, something, the sincerity of the human. And Moses, of course, was the prophet that made Judaism possible, and it was paid in a terrible way by this jealous God, and he was not allowed into the land that he promised the people in order to get them out of Egypt. He was not allowed because the jealous God wanted to kill everybody that was in the desert for 40 years, building up the belief in a God. So there was no place in the promised land for the promisers. And that is the name that Herzog chooses for his protagonist. In other words, the promiser who is not allowed into the promised land. Elkanah, which is his second given name, is the possession of God in Hebrew. So just think of it. The promiser that is refused the promised land, the possession of that jealous God, and at the end, the sincerity of the heart, the count of the heart. Moses Elkanah Herzog. Thank you very much for being with us here at Sophia, where minds meet online. A little bit about our program this week that are very nice and rich. Tuesday, we're going to meet again with the Schubert Jade, and this time with Dieter Fischer-Dieskau singing Schubert Lieder, the Swangensee. Wednesday, we have an outstanding, unique evening with Tamar Halperin, who's going to tell us her love story with music through her own playing and through music that shapes her up day by day. Thursday, we will meet again with the Borodin Quartet that would play the 13th quartet of Shostakovich, the first and second movement, and the third and fourth movement of Beethoven 7th quartet. And then Saturday, as I said, we are going to meet here with L'étranger de Albert Camus again. Have a very nice and tranquil weekend, and if you are very cold, I wish you a lot of warmth of the heart, and if you are very warm, I wish you the chill out of being exactly where you want to be. And if you're not, come and meet us again here at Sophia, where minds meet online. Good night.